What name are you bringing to the podcast and why? The No Shame in My Name podcast is a platform that celebrates and documents the stories behind names. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at No Shame in My Name Pods.
Hello students and graduates, welcome to PhD Lounge, the podcast of late night interviews where PhD students have a drink and talk about their research topics. I am your host Luis, and happy Easter and spring break to everyone. Now you are spending your time after a heavy period of lectures, having some rest, whether you are working at your part-time job, traveling with your friends overseas, being with your family, or studying for the upcoming exams in May, as well as writing assessments to submit at the end of April. Whatever you are doing at the moment, enjoy, have some fun, study and eat lots and lots of chocolate eggs following Good Friday and Easter Sunday and Monday, as you might find some rabbits inside those eggs that you have to cuddle. Anyway, let me share with you that I have been working a lot on my PhD and marking assessments. My work overall on my research project has been satisfactory, and my written drafts are still slowly but surely well structured and comprehensive for my supervisor, future examiner, and myself. I have been discussing it with my supervisor, who would examine my thesis at the Viva Voce, and even though I am not there yet, I have 2 examiners in my mind, which I proposed to my supervisor. And his answer was that either the department should choose someone in the department or from any other university that teaches ancient history. My chosen 2, Dr. Ted Kaiser and Dr. Jennifer Bed, 2 ancient historians and archaeologists who specialized in ancient urbanism, religion, art and architecture of Palmyra and Dura Europas respectively, will probably be taken into consideration. But until then, I do not want to touch upon this subject. As for marking assessment, I have been marking the same module as I did last year's term, and I believe that I am getting faster and accurate in the markings, but obviously with good and constructive feedback for students to improve their future assignments. For confidential purposes, I unfortunately cannot tell you which module is, as some students probably listen to PhD Lounge and may find out that I am one of the markers assisting the head lecturer. Therefore, my apologies. Alongside my PhD project and the assessment marking, I am currently participating in a competition called 3-Minute Thesis, founded by the University of Queensland in Australia, which consists of presenting your thesis project in just 3 minutes. You can have only one slide depicting your thesis during your presentation. You will be judged through criteria such as public speaking and engagement skills, slideshow, body language, voice tone, and most importantly, delivering your research topic effectively to a non-specialist audience. It is not easy to shorten your long research project to just 3 minutes, and the best thing is to use simple keywords that explain almost everything and captivate the audience. I did my presentation at the qualifying ground at the Singleton campus in Swansea University on the 30th of March, and all participants from this campus and a few others in Bay are in the final at the Taliesin Theatre on the 17th of May. Therefore, if you are listening to this session and would like to see the final, again, it is on the 17th of May, and you are welcome to attend my and other participants' presentations. Whoever wins advances to the UK National Finals. So to myself and the other contestants in advance, good luck and have fun at the final. All in all, I can say that I am on a good progress in university and life in general, but it is thanks to everyone who I have interacted with and who helped me, as I did as well to them, to reach the milestones I am fortunate to running through, as without all the people that I have met, I would not probably be where I currently live and study, with more things coming ahead. So a thank you to all who are listening to this session and other recorded ones, and those whom I am incredibly fortunate to meet. It is time now to present today's episode. In the last solo episode, I introduced a new podcast series called the PhD Iceberg Explained, kicking off with your decision to pursue a PhD and what you could ponder, promising as well on my last late night interview a new solo session for this series. This one is about the research proposal by approaching it differently. That is, the research proposal from the thoughts of the supervisor. I hope you will be enlightened and become even more interested in doing a PhD while hearing some thoughts about it. After I did some research, it was not easy to come up with this idea, but with effort, I managed to at least join some dots to make a good talk. I hope you enjoyed this episode. So without further ado, grab your seats, have and ready yourselves with drinks, and let's introduce this session entitled Research Proposal, the growing seed for the PhD student/supervisor relationship. Starting this session, let me tell you the classical definition of a PhD research proposal. In a few words, a research proposal entails a different approach to conducting research within a topic you intend to argue critically by finding a gap in the existing literature you have read from other specialists within the field you want to research. And that gap lies in writing a review of the literary sources, proposing methods you will use to point out the flaws in the existing literature, and planning an argument supported with scientific evidence to draw a different nuance to convince the research community, and eventually create an academic debate around your main statement. All that is written in a limited number of words and must be submitted within a stipulated deadline. This is what a PhD research proposal should look like from its initial stage to the end of your PhD, where you try to persuade any field expert that you want to specialize in using your own arguments and emerging yourself into the research community in general. And who is the first academic you must convince when submitting your research proposal? Obviously, your supervisor has the final judgment of whether or not you can undertake a PhD research project full or part-time. If you have tuned in to my first Iceberg Explained Series session on the decision to pursue a PhD, I said that a PhD is somewhat considered a professional job, where you must deliver the best of you as a potential researcher amongst your supervisor and your academic peers by writing a good research thesis. However, according to Exeter University, even when you write the research proposal, this university states that you do not need to be the exquisite expert in your field of interest, but expected to have a reasonable degree of knowledge within that field. As A, you are only outlining the research gap and filling it with your main argument. B, your level of knowledge about your field of expertise must be robust to provide a valuable argument because your project is contributing to academic research and the existing literature. And C, some students probably want to research the field you are specializing in and will likely rely upon your arguments and evidence. Briefly speaking, the research proposal means the presentation of your project and what you want to accomplish with it inside the academic field, regardless if you want to venture into academia or industry. And there are various steps you can take to successfully write your proposal to your supervisor. there are a lot of guidance materials or tips and tricks on how to write a solid and convincing research proposal by many universities, from videos to articles. I will send some of my cited sources list in the synopsis of this session. And since the supervisor matters the most for your research, I want to approach differently how a supervisor has an impact and can influence your research proposal before you submit it, and how the supervisor's point of view based on his academic experience and supervising role can lead to a potential student/supervisor long-time relationship before, during, and after the PhD. So first of all, the role of a PhD supervisor is cumbersome and has plenty of commitments with heavy work within their department, from teaching to working on their own research projects, and then dealing with the number of PhD students and masters they supervise. So you can imagine how stressful it must be for a supervisor to deal with everything simultaneously with little time management. So how do they manage it, and why do they usually have appointments with PhD students once or twice monthly? We, PhD students, sometimes ask these questions, which could be pretty downward for our ongoing research or when writing the research proposal. As I stated above, the reason is that the PhD is again considered a professional job, and the supervisor's primary role is to advise you and not educationally nurture you as if you were still an undergraduate or a master's student. They expect you to be an independent researcher in planning your own work and consulting them with that when a problem arises in your research. As for their time management, I cannot say much about how they do, because each supervisor has their own way of managing time. But we could take a guess nonetheless that on some days of the week they teach. Then there are other days they plan their research, days that they dedicate time for study sessions with the students, and so on. From hearing personal experiences from my PhD peers, I have heard from them that their supervisors often seem to dedicate little time to their PhD students and their PhD research, wondering why they usually book appointments with them either on the third week or the last week of the month, which can be sometimes frustrating when you think you are on a satisfactory progress in your research and writing structure to eventually receive feedback on whether or not you have to restructure your work as a whole. I asked that traditional question myself, and while I talked with my colleagues about why my supervisor and I would book appointments at the end of each month, I accepted that it ought to be regular and factual. On the one hand, the workload our supervisors have occupies too much of their time and overwhelms their mental health and life in general, while dealing with everything at the same time. For instance, I had an in-person meeting with my supervisor in the third week of March, but had to be rescheduled to the 29th due to his commitments with teaching and group work with his peers about planning a student week before spring break. I understood my supervisor's position and would not demand to have their meeting before the 29th, to not create tension in my relationship with my supervisor. So we showed some flexibility for my research, which has happening more than once and will likely happen again. And also, it is something that new PhD students have to get used to, and ad hoc being flexible. But on the other hand, it forces us as well to understand that position by putting ourselves in their shoes, since we also have loads of work to do instead of researching our PhDs. Some of us do teaching, others have part-time jobs, or even some others have businesses, like a friend of mine, for example, who I assume that he studies a PhD in computer science and owns a real estate business. And lastly, our appointments with them are merely to overview what we have done on a chapter draft and point out aspects to either restructure or improve writing, set research targets, or take notes about a book or an article, since PhD is about independent research. But does the supervisor massive schedule affect your research proposal and future relationship during the PhD. From the get-go, the research proposal is the first piece of PhD independent research when finding gaps, writing critically about them, and suggesting a different approach, sending the draft and receiving feedback from the supervisor. And alongside the supervisor's stress due to its whole working week, I think that pressure may fall onto you as well, because you are starting to feel it while writing the proposal under a deadline in the hopes of you being a potential PhD candidate following submitting it. Moreover, I think that there is a two-faced situation here, as you may not know who your supervisor is, or you may know him since the master's or even back to undergraduate while you wrote your MA and undergrad dissertations respectively. In the first situation, when you are about to start writing your proposal, the essential step is to find a supervisor that matches your research interests with theirs, combining both your working schedule and style. For example, the Charlesworth Author Services website states that for a potential PhD candidate, when applying for a PhD, the student has to clarify which supervisor works best in terms of academic and emotional support for the student having hopes of achieving the Doctor of Philosophy degree. That is why it is essential to research the range of PhD supervisors and their work throughout their academic profession, which might be helpful for your research proposal until the end of your PhD. All that is done through a student/supervisor initial communication and online or in-person meeting when discussing research prospects and objectives to achieve during the PhD. This is one way to begin a relationship with your future supervisor when you write your research proposal, showing them your potential and knowledge about the subject you want to specialize in and fitting your way of conducting research with the supervisor's research methods. The second case of knowing your supervisor, since you're undergraduate or master's, gives you advantage points to know what to expect from a PhD, since you know the supervisor's academic schedule, teaching and researching models, likely to match yours when you begin writing your proposal. In my opinion, this second case is quicker and easier for you as the relationship becomes more solid when you start writing it, and you know what type of feedback and advice your supervisor gives for their students to improve themselves, since you also undertook those paths throughout your undergraduate and master's assessments and dissertations. For example, suppose you are an active writer, seeking and engaging with different research methods, and your supervisor has more or less an identical way of innovative research and writing style. In that case, it is probable that you and your supervisor have a great relationship and be able to navigate the same waters when both of you discuss the research gaps to be filled through your proposal. I am fortunate to have chosen the supervisor I had in my MA and the second supervisor for my PhD, because the latter was my advisor in choosing the topic I currently research more profoundly and my current supervisor, respectively. Also, my current supervisors and I have the same research interests within the field I study, ancient archaeology, urbanism, and art history of the Near East. And so, it was easy for me to choose my research topic on Hellenistic Greco-Roman cities built in Syria and Mesopotamia between the Seleucid, Parthian, and Roman empires. And the feedback he gives to me is informative and detailed by asking questions in a different aspects he considers problematic, making me think about turning my arguments in a more simplest and more informative way for the reader, i.e. the examiner during the viva voce, even though my supervisor sometimes understands my ideas. Still, depending on the research evidence, they often need more coherence and nuance. Another aspect the supervisor may impact your research proposal and the thesis project onwards is written and verbal feedback, which significantly influences how you work on your project and build a relationship with your supervisor. Feedback, I assume, is by far the most critical bullet point from the research proposal until the end of the PhD, where the supervisor demands more from you as a future researcher when they provide constructive feedback. From the supervisor's point of view, Feedback is an essential communicative tool they utilize towards their students. Besides being an influential element in developing the PhD student's academic skills, it can engage the student to create a balanced and healthy relationship with the supervisor. And why? Because it is one characteristic of an academic interaction in which it goes when the student receives and understands the supervisor's feedback message, and then the former reciprocates it with a better argument, showing the latter academic improvement. But how does the supervisor generally write feedback if it is oriented-based? Surely New and I.C. Lee, in their article about understanding supervisors' commentary practices, claim that the PhD from the research proposal to the project, the supervisor often organizes their written feedback based on the different areas students are appreciated whilst writing their PhD proposals and dissertations. Those areas are primarily literature review, knowledge engagement, and linguistic accuracy. Within those three categories, the supervisor underlines the range of literature, content, and genre knowledge, engagement with the evidence, argument development, rhetorical structure and organization, and accuracy and coherence in the written language. This is the criteria, according to Yu and Lee, that the supervisor follows when the student starts writing the research proposal to engage with the specializing topic, scaffolding the student with constructive feedback under those guidelines to enhance the argument as well as the knowledge on the subject and writing abilities, so that the student will be able to enter smoothly into and show research quality during the PhD journey. Moreover, writing feedback also pushes the supervisor to communicate better with the student if they write it in an oriented-based way, in the sense that it has to be professional and academic, which teaches the student to figure out a different approach to address the argument, reflecting too if the supervisor discusses the feedback verbally with the student. The more feedback the supervisor gives in a research proposal, but from an oriented-based, as well as balanced and constructive perspective, the more the student is likely to engage with and figure out alternative ways to address the academic gap while writing the research proposal effectively to submit it afterwards. Without feedback, the less or no impact the student has to fulfill the desirable performance of a PhD candidate. Suppose your supervisor gives you poorly the feedback around your content regarding suggestions and critical thinking. The relationship between you and your supervisor may decrease because both sides lack motivation, confidence, and orientation. For anyone who is listening to this session and happens to be a PhD supervisor or PhD student who is gaining teaching experience through assessment marking or lecturing, then you probably know what I'm talking about. Perhaps due to the feeling of how difficult giving feedback may be for your students to receive and take it positively for them consistently improving their academic skills. Finding a supervisor that you do not know and you begin your relationship by understanding the supervisor's research interests and working style, or knowing already your supervisor's research techniques, personality, and written and verbal feedback are some of the various essential aspects to take into consideration when writing the research proposal, which will influence as well throughout your PhD project. But before the end of this session, I want to share one last bullet point about student/supervisor relationship development in your research proposal. That is emotional support from your supervisor and what impact it might bring to you and your mental health while you write the research proposal, and if you become admitted or not admitted after submitting it. Since emotional support at the start of your research proposal deals with ups and downs through the supervisor's feedback, and you improve your writing content at your best, I ask the following questions. How does the supervisor support you when you are writing your research proposal? And what happens if you are admitted into the PhD program or not? If admitted, how does your relationship with your supervisor take another level? And if you are not admitted, will your relationship with your supervisor deteriorate to the fact that a supervising change could happen if you decide to apply again for a PhD, or will it start again to materialize, but with new aspirations from you and your supervisor to strengthen the relationship? While I was writing these questions, I was somewhat confused about what I wanted to communicate with you about emotional support on a PhD research proposal. But after chewing some sources, I found some interesting thoughts that impact the supervisor's role and what emotional supporting factors might affect you and your proposal. Patricia Gosling argues that life is full of ups and downs, making us aware and understanding why it has to be like that. However, there is no need to delve into this because it is something natural that pushes us to become emotionally stronger when solving problems that leads us to develop problem-solving skills. In a research proposal, this happens with every potential PhD candidate, regardless of what field you want to become an expert. As human beings, both you and your supervisor generally share feelings and problems you are facing that may impact your research proposal. While you are about to submit your research proposal, maybe you are showing feelings of anxiety, stress, isolation, and pressure from your peers, close friends, family, or even your supervisor in submitting the perfect research proposal within the stipulated deadline. Different emotions are hard to handle, which makes you feel overwhelmed and not thinking what to write more or what research gaps you think you have to critically analyze, thinking at the same time if you are going to be admitted or having a fear of not being admitted to pursue your PhD degree. We want to share emotions, which sometimes makes us feel uncomfortable or delicate when trying to do our best in any activity. All in all, it is okay to feel like that, and especially in a research proposal. You do not have to be the expert in your field, nor the supervisor expects you to do so. Same as a supervisor who has lots of things to do at once, and sometimes it damages their mental health. They also want their students to excel in their PhDs from the research proposal until the viva voce. When you feel stressed that you find it hard to write your research proposal or fear that you will not be admitted, the task of your supervisor regarding emotional support is to adapt their feelings and emotions to yours and motivate you to achieve that milestone. Remember also that your supervisor passed through all the procedures of a research proposal and faced mental distress as well in trying to do their best to be admitted and obtain the PhD degree during their years of research. In the instance of the proposal, the supervisor might try to talk to you professionally and address what is going wrong with it, helping you to identify rabbit holes where, not saying failing, but not approaching it critically through written and verbal feedback, as I mentioned before. There is an interesting article about psychological safety and emotional intelligence by two psychology students, and excuse me for my misspelling names here, Guna Sequeira and Liana Gemage, supervised by Mario Fernando, who argue that the link between PS and EI in a relationship between student and supervisor occurs since they are a team and work within a team working atmosphere, and in connection with EI during a student/supervisor relationship, PS in a PhD, and especially when proposing your research project, bears upon these factors at individual and team levels: impersonal risk tasking, learning, developing mutual trust and respect, performance, engagement, communication, well-being, and growth. These factors may sound much, but the supervisor likely uses them to show empathy and motivate you to keep pushing yourself while you write your proposal and submit it afterwards. Furthermore, in case something personal affects you, such as a member of your family is ill, and you are not able to properly write the research proposal and or submit it on the deadline, the supervisor then supports your well-being and shows emotional intelligence by, for example, using their own self-reflection of past or current experiences they are facing. Maybe they also have someone ill in their families, in an attempt to motivate and tell you that ups and downs often occur. Therefore, you should overcome them as time passes. I do not know about anyone requesting a later submission of their PhD research proposal beyond the deadline, even though I did extensive research to find a reliable source or even an opinion on Reddit or Quora. I could not find it, but only PhD students requesting deadline extensions for their PhD thesis, but at their advanced stages. Nevertheless, I managed to find at least one example of a deadline extension on a research proposal. According to Exeter University, regarding the 2021-22 PhD in Business research proposal, if students did not meet the business school's PhD research proposal requirements, the school allowed the candidates to submit their outstanding proposals by the 31st of August, 4 weeks before the official beginning of the PhD in later September and early October, following their contact with the admissions team. Regarding the submission and whether you are admitted or not into the PhD, in case that your supervisor and the members of the department accepted your research proposal and you got admitted into the PhD, it is more than likely that your relationship with the supervisor increases even more, since you will work with your supervisor regularly in many aspects, such as setting targets in terms of submitting chapter drafts or announcing things within the research like a conference, a congress, or a call for papers that your supervisor is interested and communicates them with you. However, the work of your PhD project will be even more challenging with all the feedback your supervisor gives on your writing, structure and arguments, and often emotional ups and downs that you will be aware of, and the supervisor supports you in anything you are concerned about. In case you are not admitted into the PhD after waiting for some time for the decision of your supervisor and the department, obviously it is a painful feeling for any applicant who worked so hard and smart to submit the proposal in the hopes of contributing to academic research. Does the relationship you had with your supervisor at the time of writing the research proposal vanish if you are rejected? I think it depends on you if you are still keen on not giving up on moving forward, reapplying with a new research proposal, and keeping in contact with the supervisor who initially guided you to supervise you again. On the other hand, I assume that most relationships between students and supervisors go south when not admitted into the PhD, even during the project. Most students who are not admitted into the PhD likely change to a new supervisor when reapplying, maybe because the personalities of the student and supervisor and also co-supervisor entered into conflict. There was not a clear communication in the proposed clear objectives. The supervisor offered minimal emotional support when needed. The proposal was unrealistic and or had lack of potential, and many other factors which led to the deterioration of a relationship with your supervisor at the beginning of your research proposal. But hey, you failed? That's okay. You can try again with a new supervisor and be fueled with new motivation and engagement to write your new proposal and start a fresh relationship better than the other one you had previously. It is okay to win and to fail, but it is not okay to give up. Therefore, if you are about to write your research proposal and you have to submit whether this month or in the coming ones, I send the best of luck and keep you engaging with your supervisor. If you were rejected the first time, check every aspect of your proposal and what you can improve. Talk again with your supervisor or change to a new one to come up with new and fresh ideas when reapplying to the PhD. And all the best for your PhD adventure if you are about to write your research proposal and in your relationship with your supervisor and co-supervisor. And with all this, I wrap up this second session of the PhD Iceberg Explained Series. I hope you enjoyed listening to it and had some thoughts about writing a research proposal and creating a relationship with your supervisor at this pre-step of the PhD journey. More sessions of this series are coming soon, as well as late-night interviews. And to stay tuned in, check your favorite podcast stations: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and many more. If you enjoy the content I research and the late-night interviews with PhD students, please consider leaving your feedback or a review for the podcast algorithm at my newest website, phdlounge.co.uk. You can also follow my social media, Facebook at PhD Pod Launch, Instagram at PhD LMF, and Twitter at PhD Launchcast. And if you would like to make a donation to grow the podcast, you can click on the left side of my website or the Donate tab. Thanking you in advance for your gesture. Thank you all for tuning in. It has been a pleasure.